Okay, so I want to address an issue that refers to a particular individual, but is actually just the latest in the sense of an ongoing series of allegations against high-profile individuals. I'm referring to Edward Heath, the former Prime Minister. He was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1970 to 1974, and was the leader of the Conservative Party for about 10 years. Um, Starting from about the same time as the Jimmy Savile inquiries were going on, there was some speculation into the possible conduct of Edward Heath in his past. It's important, I think, to give a little bit of biography here. It's sort of common knowledge that Edward Heath was possibly gay. Why is this significant? It's significant because um, he was allegedly gay at a time when it was illegal, and there was always questions over his relationships with women. He was one of the few bachelors to occupy 10 Downing Street. The other two were William Pitt the Younger and Arthur Balfour. Um, and during the 1970 campaign, the Tories, and earlier than that, the Tories had sort of tried to hitch him up with a woman. They were very wary of how this would have been interpreted to the public. At that time, Britain was still arguably quite a homophobic society. So I suppose they worried about image and so on. I remember seeing old footage of Heath campaigning in the 1970 general election, and an attractive young woman sort of kissed him on the cheek. So the Tories kind of they were certainly wary of that. Now, being gay, of course, is we're a much more tolerant society today. That in itself wouldn't be any issue. It shouldn't be any issue. But the more serious allegation is that he was a paedophile. Now, as I say, there's been a long list of high-profile names that have sort of been connected with this in recent years, and there have been a large number of older men who have been tied to paedophilia or allegedly connected with it. And there's sort of two schools of thought here. One is that the establishment has covered up massive scale abuse, and therefore there's no smoke without fire. The other school of thought is that there is a danger here of allegations turning into a witch hunt. If you look at pretty much any Ted Heath video online, it doesn't matter what the subject is. It doesn't matter if it's about Ted Heath in the European Union or Ted Heath in Northern Ireland. Virtually every video now will have at least some comments talking about this issue. And a lot of people just jump to conclusions to say Ted Heath the nonce and this sort of thing. Um, Personally, I just don't know. I just don't know. I do think there are legitimate questions that need to be asked. Some of the sources are themselves quite dubious. Michael Shrimpton is a former barrister. He himself has been convicted of possessing child pornography, so he's not exactly the best source to look at. On the other hand, it could be argued that as a sex offender himself, he would know. Um, there are other less well known people who have alleged that Ted Heath was a well known sailor, yachtsman, and they have alleged that there was a boys' home, I believe it was in the Channel Islands or maybe in Jersey, and that none other than Jimmy Savile actually took children or young men, and the legal interpretation of this is quite important. But in the United Kingdom, 14 is the age of criminal responsibility. Hence, anyone over 14 is seen as a young man as opposed to a child in the eyes of the law. But the allegation is that none other than Jimmy Savile took young men from this home and introduced them to Heath on his yacht, and they simply disappeared. Now, if there is anything to this, this would be possibly the political scandal of the century. This would dwarf the Profumo affair. Would dwarf almost any other scandal, and there's a long line of British political scandals. When you really think about this, the implications would be immense. That a former British Prime Minister, a world leader who in his time in office was among the most powerful people in the world, was a sex offender, um, a predator, that would be the consequences of that would be immense. Now it goes without saying, Ted Heath died 11 years ago. He died in 2005. So even if all of it is true, well, what happens next? You can't arrest the dead man. But I think the reason why a lot of people are raising questions about this is because of the consequences of the Jimmy Savile situation. Jimmy Savile is now seen as probably Britain's most prolific paedophile. Um, and that scandal had consequences across the board. When he died in 2011, tributes flew in. Oh, what a great guy, great entertainer. Within months of that, the inquiries started, and now we know he was basically a piece of shit. He was a prolific predator, and the BBC got a lot of slack from that. So did the establishment, however you determine that, for essentially covering this up. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. That at the time people were saying, "Oh, these are just people trying to get attention," but then it went on that actually there was something in this, and I think this is a real challenge. You know, people often say, "Well, why are they coming forward now, referring to witnesses?" But as the Jimmy Savile case shows, even if they did report the crimes at the time, they wouldn't be taken seriously. Young women who report these crimes were basically told to shut up. And that's a complete and utter disgrace. So that is something that needs to be acknowledged. On the other hand, there have been high profile celebrities like Cliff Richard who have been totally exonerated. And in the case of Cliff Richard, he was named. He went through hell for 2 years through these allegations. It turned out to have no basis. So for me, it's a case of trying to get some sort of balance. The police need to get this right because actually, Wiltshire Police, who were responsible for the Ted Heath allegations, because that's where he spent a lot of his life in Salisbury, they've had to justify reopening this investigation. Some people have said they have handled it very badly, and there have been a number of IPCC inquiries into their conduct, Independent Police Complaints Commission. But to be fair to the police, I think they are going to be criticised either way. If they don't take action, they're going to be accused of being part of a cover up. If they do take action, then, Heath supporters are going to say it's a witch hunt. I think where there are serious allegations, those investigations have to be investigated. I don't think it's a waste of police time. These are serious crimes. And it is just an investigation. It's not saying he is guilty. And that's the other point I would add. People should be very careful before they slander Ted Heath. They don't know for a fact. Um, I think personally there is maybe something to this, but I don't know for certain. So people are coming out online and saying things that he was a nonce and so on. That's a very irresponsible thing to be saying about a former premier. Um, I'm not saying he's innocent, but it's a very serious allegation to make against someone. And the fact he's passed away, his family still has to hear that sort of stuff. Um, Now, unlike the Jimmy Savile case, from what I can tell, there has been no alleged victims coming forward. That's a big difference with the Savile case. With the Savile case, there was dozens of people came forward and said they were abused by Savile. I haven't heard of anyone so far saying they were abused by Heath. So that's a big difference. But there have been other people, high profile celebrities involved in this, several DJs, Rolf Harris, Gary Glitter. Um, so, there is a precedent to this. But I think it would be unfortunate if we get into a situation where every male celebrity over the age of 70 is going to be have fingers pointed at them saying, "Oh, is he a nonce?" So that is a real danger. And Cliff Richard's experience shows that, the police also have to be careful, and the media have to be careful not to create a winch hunt situation. I guess they responded to the Cliff Richard allegations because they were wary of the criticism that they received for the Jimmy Savile case. My response would be it's about getting middle ground. Where there are allegations, they have to be taken seriously. But I personally am a big skeptic of a suspect being named, but the accuser can enjoy total anonymity. I think that is wrong. Um, it's wrong whether the person is a celebrity or whether they're a Joe Average. I think in serious crime situations, whether it be alleged paedophilia or an alleged rape, then I can understand, by the way, in alleged paedophilia cases, children being kept anonymous. I totally understand that, but I think an adult woman who's accusing a man of rape, if the man is going to be named, then why should she enjoy anonymity? That's not to say that she's not telling the truth, but I believe that anonymity is essential for due process because when Cliff Richard was initially named, only his hardcore fans would have defended him. Everyone else would have thought, okay, well, there's a possibility there because you had these people like Rolf Harris, like Jimmy Savile, who were charismatic people who had a persona of being very amicable. I mean, Rolf Harris was seen as a charming old fellow. Um, so was Rolf Harris in some ways. Excuse me, Jimmy Savile. So what I would say about all of this is that the police have a responsibility to act where there are allegations, but they need to act on evidence, not on hearsay, and they need to there needs to be a real solid sort of lead go on this. But I personally have issue with people being named before they're even found guilty or innocent. I think that is a big problem. Um, the argument, of course, would be if the tabloids say, I don't know, a 72-year-old celebrity was named as such and such, there will be people trying to guess who it is. But I still think that causes less damage than outright naming someone who might later on turn out to be innocent, like Sir Cliff Richard. Um, so, getting the balance in this is extremely important. I do think it is unfortunate that a lot of people are going on the internet and just saying, oh, Ted Heath was a nonce. He might well have been. And one thing that we did learn from the Jimmy Savile case is that nobody should be above the law, no matter how popular they are or how prominent they are. I mean, one of the most disgraceful things about the Savile case is how very powerful people basically courted him, going right up to the Prime Minister. Margaret Thatcher was very warm towards Savile, which was a complete disgrace. Now, does that mean she absolutely knew what was going on? Possibly not. But at the very least, if there were question marks being raised at the time, she shouldn't have been so pally with him. But I also think people need to be responsible when they're throwing out things like this person's a nonce, that person's a nonce. Unfortunately, now we're getting into a situation where every politician is being slandered, which of course is nonsense. Because you have good men and women who are going to be slandered with tarred with the same brush when they're completely innocent. When I say good, I mean innocent. Um, and not liking someone's politics is not a reason to. I remember when Dennis Healy passed away last year, the former Labour Chancellor. There were people actually saying, "Oh, another nonce hits the dust," and I can't help but feel that was people who just didn't like his politics. That's a completely disgraceful thing to say. People need to be responsible for the words. So when people are saying Ted Heath is a nonce, they need to have evidence to make a claim like that. That's not to say that he wasn't. So I would say the same thing about people forcefully defending him that remember what happened with Jimmy Savile. So yeah, all of this is about getting a balance. Um, and it isn't easy, but I wouldn't blame Wiltshire Police for opening up an investigation. It's true that they can't necessarily arrest anyone, but I don't think it's a waste of time. If we're talking about young men who could have been murdered, that's a very serious situation. And also, another point that I would just add to this when we talk about crimes supposedly involving gay suspects, now, assuming that Ted Heath was gay, look at the Stephen Port case recently. The victims made an allegation against the Metropolitan Police that wasn't taken seriously because the victims were gay. That reminds me a bit of the Dennis Nielsen case in the 80s, sort of this attitude that, oh, well, they're not that important because they're gay. In the case of the Stephen Port case, the victims were all found in the same position, slumped against headstones in the cemetery. Um, and from what I understand, there is a IPCC complaint going on into that. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. Are the police right to act? Is it a witch hunt? Is there no smoke without fire? I take something of a neutral approach. I think people need to be very careful before just throwing out these things because bear in mind, Ted Heath can't defend himself. A dead man can't defend himself. But by the same token, we shouldn't assume that no matter how powerful someone is or how prominent, that they are innocent. You know, prominent people have been involved in some very, very dubious things. So it's either a case of no smoke without fire or let's not get into a witch hunt. But you know, there have been a number of other high-profile politicians. Not Ted Heath is the most high-profile, but there have been others who have been tied up with this, like Lord Janner. Um, so yeah, let me know your thoughts. I think we need to really get the balance right. Um, let's not just slander people without evidence, but at the same time, let's not assume that people are innocent just because they're high profile.